Hello everybody, and welcome to your top human rights organization review. I am your host, Bryce Dolan. Today we're going to look at 5 different top human rights organizations, and we'll look at an article from each one of these organizations. First, we'll begin the show with Amnesty International, as they call for a chemical weapons investigation in Sudan. Next, Human Rights Foundation wants Thailand to overturn the guilty verdict of a British activist. Then, Human Rights Watch calls our attention to individuals with mental illness living in shackles. Then, the FIDH, the International Federation for Human Rights, condemns the unlawful death penalty in Belarus. Then we'll end the show with the NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, as they criticize the closure of the world's largest refugee camp. Now, to begin, Amnesty International calls for a chemical weapons investigation in Sudan. Member states of the international body responsible for monitoring the use of chemical weapons must trigger an investigation into the alleged chemical weapons attacks in the Jebel al-Mara area of Darfur, revealed by Amnesty International last month. Now, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Executive Council, the OPCW, will start a 3-day meeting at the organization's headquarters in The Hague. Many of the members who will be present at the meeting, including France and other EU member states, have expressed their alarm over the chemical weapons allegations. Expressing concern and consternation will not suffice. We need to see concrete steps towards an independent investigation. We have credible evidence of horrific injuries and estimates of up to 250 deaths caused by dozens of suspected chemical weapons attacks against civilian populations over the past 9 months, said Turana Hassan, Director of Crisis Response at Amnesty International. These brutal attacks have caused unimaginable human suffering, particularly among young children, and must be investigated. Darfur dropped off the international agenda a decade ago, but the relentless attacks on villages and slaughter of civilians, as well as apparent use of chemical weapons, show that it must be put back on as a matter of urgency. Now, the international community cannot ignore this wake-up call, and independent investigations into the use of chemical weapons must be instigated at this meeting. Amnesty International is calling for member states at the OPCW meeting, which takes place between October 11th and October 14th, to formally request that the Executive Council of the OPCW obtain clarification from the government of Sudan about the alleged use of chemical weapons in the Jebel Mara area in accordance with Article 9 of the Chemical Weapons Convention. If the Executive Council is unable to obtain adequate clarification from the government of Sudan, then member states must formally request a comprehensive on-site challenge inspection. So, as that meeting is taking place, we will keep our eye to Amnesty International to see if we can get an update on these alleged chemical weapon usage in Sudan. Now next, the Human Rights Foundation calls for the guilty verdict of a British journalist be overturned, or activist. On September 20th, British Labour activist Andy Hall was convicted on charges of criminal defamation and sentenced to 3 years in prison with a 2-year suspended sentence. The charges were in connection with his contribution to a 2013 FinWatch report that highlighted various violations of migrant workers' rights committed by Natural Fruit, a large wholesaler in Thailand. Mr. Hall, a migration expert from Mahidol University, led a field research team for FinWatch. The FinWatch report exposed dangerous working conditions and discrimination of migrant workers at Natural Fruit, among other violations as well. Mr. Hall intends to appeal the guilty verdict. Now, instead of dragging Mr. Hall into court and putting him in prison, the Thai government should have thanked Mr. Hall for his work and investigated these troubling violations, said Human Rights Foundation President Thor Halvorsen. Mr. Hall is being persecuted for exposing abusive labor practices at a large corporation that has ties to officials in Thailand's authoritarian regime, Halvorsen concluded. Now, Mr. Hall's defamation charge was based on an Al Jazeera interview during which he spoke about the findings of the report. He was also charged with computer crimes for supposedly uploading confidential information to the FinWatch website. Now, under the International Covenant on Civil Rights and Political Rights, of which Thailand is a signatory, freedom of expression, including the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds must be protected by all governments. International law further requires that in a defamation prosecution, public interest of the subject matter must be a defense available to the defendant. Moreover, Thailand's criminal defamation law states that anyone who expresses in good faith an opinion or a statement of any person or thing subjected to public criticism will not be guilty of defamation. So Thailand is pretty much going against everything they believe in when they and everything they stand for technically when they convicted Mr. Andy Hall of defamation. He was simply just doing his duty, reporting on human rights violations of migrant workers. We'll keep an eye on Mr. Andy Hall as we have these past couple months following his defamation case. We'll see if he can get an appeal. We sure hope he does. Now, next, Human Rights Watch brings us to Indonesia, where Pasung was banned in 1977. But since the Indonesian government is decentralized, implementation of the ban has been slow. You don't know what Pasung is? We'll take a look.
In Indonesia, people with mental health conditions are put in Pasung, chained or locked up in homes or in institutions because they have conditions such as schizophrenia or depression.
Pasung sangat umum karena kalau kita melihat masalah pasung itu kan ada macam-macam bentuknya. Bisa dikurung di rumah, dikurung di kamar, atau pakai balok kayu, atau pakai besi, atau nggak boleh keluar pagar. Itu artinya adalah dia harus tidur, buang air besar, buang air kecil, makan di tempat yang sama.
People are shackled in homes by their families, in institutions run by faith healers and traditional healers, and sometimes even in social care institutions. Agus is a 26-year-old man with a psychosocial disability. He was locked up in a shed by his family for a month.
Itu kan tidak enak, itu panas perasaannya. Ya kaki diikat, ya tangan diikat gitu. Karena kalau nggak diikat itu meruksak gitu. Pas di dalam kurungnya itu pasti ruksak gitu. Karena perasaan itu ada yang masuk ke dalam badan gitu.
Agus's family decided to lock him up because they didn't know what was happening to him. They were convinced, they told me, he was possessed by the devil.
Ya gitu ceritanya gitu. Emang Agus itu cina kemasukan roh ya yang aneh gitu, ya gitu. Ya pokoknya mau berdiri itu susah karena kurungnya pendek gitu. Ya duduk aja gitu.
Today Agus is working in his village, building houses, and leads a fulfilling life because he's receiving the support and services that he needs. Currently, the government estimates that there are about 18,000 people who are still shackled in Indonesia. Despite this practice being illegal in Indonesia, the government has banned Pasung since 1977, and yet the practice persists across the country. We visited one institution run by a faith healer where the Department of Social Affairs was actually sending people. They knew fully well people were being shackled.
Kami juga menampung beberapa pasien yang dari Dinas Sosial Brebes yang pada bulan sekarang ini kurang lebih ada 14 orang.
People who are put in Pasung become extremely neglected, isolated, and develop all sorts of physical ailments as a result of being chained.
Akibat dari pemasungan ini semakin lama tentu semakin banyak yang bisa ditimbulkan. Pertama tentu atrofi otot-otot ya, otot-otot jadi mengecil, kemudian gizi jadi buruk ya, karena income yang tidak baik. Kalau dari sudut mental mungkin juga bisa terjadi traumatic experience pada mereka, pengalaman trauma. Mereka juga secara sosial mereka kehilangan banyak kesempatan.
We met Ikram's family in Central Java. Ikram has been locked up in this shed for many years now. We spoke to his brother, Mustafa, who explained the challenges his family faced in caring for his brother.
Oh, dia suka ngamuk-ngamuk. Terus dia sama nampar sama orang tua saya. Terus sama saya. Saya kan kasih ikat sama tali, langsung dia kalau udah kena dia langsung masukin sana. Ya makan.
There was a time where Ikram's family took him to see a doctor, where he had access to medication and services, and he was doing much better. He even lived for a short while in the family home. However, as soon as the medication ran out, and the family did not have time to travel to a provincial hospital and to spend the money on a regular basis, Ikram was put back in the shed.
Masalahnya dengan Pasung ini adalah karena memang tidak ada pilihan lain yang disediakan. Keluarga kemudian tidak mempunyai pilihan karena dukungan tidak ada, baik dukungan sosial, dukungan ekonomi, dukungan medis, dukungan treatment yang lain, sehingga akhirnya satu-satunya jalan keluar yang mereka miliki adalah di Pasung atau ditaruh di panti, dan panti itulah yang kemudian memasung orang tersebut.
I encourage you to take a look at the Human Rights Watch article, Let People with Mental Illness Live in Dignity, Not in Shackles, by Kriti Sharma. Now, the International Federation for Human Rights declares the death penalty in Belarus murder on unlawful grounds. On October 4, 2016, FIDH and the Human Rights Council, HRC, Vyazna, attended the death penalty verdict reaffirmed in appeal by the Supreme Court of Belarus in the case of Sergei Vostrikov. The two organizations call on the Belarusian authorities to suspend immediately his execution and more generally to abolish the death penalty in their country, or to establish a moratorium as a first step towards the abolition. Now, after almost 1.5-year break, executions in Belarus resumed in April of 2016 after the EU lifted most of the restrictive measures imposed on Belarus for human rights violations. Belarus is the last and single retentionist country in Europe. The EU should go vocal and assure that a moratorium on the death penalty is among major tangible steps which should shape the EU's future policy towards Belarus. The 90-page report shows that in Belarus, torture and ill treatment are widely used to force suspects to incriminate themselves in the absence of a lawyer. The right to defense is systematically violated. Lawyers and judges generally lack independence, as does the judicial system as a whole. Throughout his entire trial, my son maintained that his confessions had been obtained during the first interrogations under torture and psychological pressure. The speed with which they sentenced and executed my son, and the fact that the Prosecutor General and the Minister of Justice were dismissed before the court's judgment show that the case was purely political, stated Lyubov Kovaleva, mother of Vladislav Kovalov, executed in 2012. Now, according to the campaign Human Rights Defender Against the Death Penalty in Belarus, around 400 people were executed in Belarus since its independence in 1991. Currently, 4 persons are on death row, including the one whose verdict was confirmed at the October 4th hearing during the FIDH mission to the country. Now, to end the show, a new report from the NRC criticizes closure of the world's largest refugee camp. The report criticizes the returns process from the Dadaab camp in Kenya to Somalia as no longer being voluntary, safe, or dignified. The report, titled Dadaab's Broken Promise, says that the decision by the government of Kenya in May to close the Dadaab refugee camps in November has led to a situation where the voluntary returns process does not meet international standards and breaks the agreement that Somalis would be assisted to return home safely and voluntarily. We are willing and able to enable voluntary return, but the pressure to push more than 280,000 registered refugees from Dadaab camp has led to chaotic and disorganized returns. From what we have seen on the ground, it is no longer voluntary, dignified, nor safe, said Jan Egeland. Refugees in Dadaab need international protection. The Kenyan government and the UN Refugee Agency should reinstate the organized and voluntary process of return under the tripartite agreement. The unrealistic deadline must be removed before the situation further deteriorates, Egeland continued. Now, the tripartite agreement for the voluntary return of Somali refugees from Kenya was signed by the Kenyan and Somali governments and UNHCR in 2013. It was based on international law and created a framework in which returns were to be organized. The initial returns program under the 2013 tripartite agreement was largely a success, as it saw Somalis would be assisted to reach their return location safely and with dignity. We should return to the terms of this agreement rather than simply aiming to push back as many refugees as possible, said Egeland. The number of vulnerable Somalis planned for return far outstrips the resources available to support them in Somalia, warned Neil Turner, Norwegian Refugee Council's country director in Kenya. Sustainable return should form a key component of the returns program. It must prevent families ending up in displacement camps in Somalia or returning as undocumented refugees to Kenya. So, still trying to figure out what to do with the large population of refugees at the Dadaab refugee camp as they are preparing to close it down this November, as it looks like they're not getting anywhere with being able to unfortunately keep the largest refugee camp open. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can find all of these articles on the websites of these human rights organizations. Feel free to go onto their websites, read through these articles in their entirety. But I want to thank you for watching the show. Thank you for listening to your top human rights organization review. Make sure you keep watching for more shows. And I was your host, Bryce Dolan.